WMAN News Radio 98.3.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Brock Lawley program. My name is Brock Lawley. It's good to be with you. I really enjoy being with you. What a gorgeous day out there. Gorgeous Sunday. I was driving in, and everything you could expect in a fall day, you are presented. So this is a little bit of a threshing floor. I like to sift out the chaff, media chaff. We deep dive the news here every week. For so many stories kind of pummel us, and we just don't have the time to marinate on them. And so I kind of try to sift out the lies like chaff and the golden wheat of truth, and I try to serve it up to your ADD reality television, primetime television minds, and that's what we're going to try to do. So we're going to try to tackle some stuff. But the way I set up the show is on the back end, we do some of that. On the front end, I'd like to have a particular monologue. And this week, I discovered a story that is right in my wheelhouse because I'm very, very passionate about this, and that is school choice, the freedom to educate your children as you wish, especially in the face of what is a failing public school system by way of academics. And there's really no way around that. I mean, the test scores continue to come back poor. And a lot of parents, as a result of that, choose from a myriad of decisions by way of how to educate their children. Some homeschool, some private school, some charter school. And needless to say, there is a big portion of this country that does not like that. There's a lot of money, a lot of power in education. It is a very, very contentious debate in our body politic. Well, I discovered a story that was very, very troubling concerning parental rights and anti-homeschooling. And here's how it goes. Adam Lanza. Do you guys remember Adam Lanza? That's the murderer behind Sandy Hook massacre. Do you remember this? Well, a very, very small sliver of his educational history, Adam Lanza, was homeschooled. Now I'm talking about a very, very, very small sliver, about a year and a half. And the latest from the left, the latest from the anti-homeschooling movement, and this is the state of Connecticut, they put together a Sandy Hook Advisors Committee. And one of the things they came back with was that the government needs to focus on homeschool families. You see, they focused like a laser on that. And it's interesting, as I deep dive this, we're going to discover some rational problems with that conclusive finding. But a bureaucrat, basically, named Catherine Flaherty, said that kids need to get what kids need, and if they aren't getting the things that, quote unquote, they need to be addressed by the state. The state needs to step in and meet the quote unquote needs. A very, very loose term, by the way, a very bureaucratic term, need. So the recommendation from this committee is that the state needs to increase oversight over homeschool parents. Another bureaucrat, Dr. Swartz, said huge risks for the state if they don't step in and address the social and emotional needs. Now pay attention to that, social and emotional needs of your children, going to be addressed by the state. With a public benefit. No blame at all went to public schools in this particular case, in the Connecticut school shooting with Adam Lanza. And that's very, very interesting because Adam Lanza spent the vast majority of his time being educated in public schools. That, of course, was skipped over. So here's the facts. Adam Lanza was a homeschool kid for about a year and a half during high school at the recommendation, by the way, of a psychologist. That's why his parents did that. His parents were constantly looking for ways to find Adam help, by the way. This case is amazing because it's an exact duplicate of what the state tells parents what to do. Basically was implemented perfectly if you go by their standards. Everything the bureaucrats say should happen happened in this case. And what we see here is a bloated, intrusive, and obvious, statist overreach, taking exactly the wrong lessons and from the facts on the ground in this situation with this school shooting. They're not letting tragedy go to waste, if you will. Now, not only was Adam predominantly educated in public schools, but his parents took him to psychotherapists, psychologists, any number of psychological help Adam received. They even sought out specialists from Harvard University. So Adam's parents, did what they needed to do. They followed the blueprint to a T. And now these same intrusive, quote-unquote, progressives are attempting to blame homeschooling for the tragedy. It bothers me on so many levels because, as far as I'm seeing it, they're using the blood of these slain children to increase status power and restrict parental rights and grow government and overreach into how people rear their own children. And this spasm of status overreach is always what we see in the face of tragedy. It's very, very bothersome for me. It happens that they go out their guns. It's always more programs. It's always, take more rights away. And I guess in a futile attempt to feel more safe or feel like we're doing something. They basically shoehorn whatever the issue is, whatever the tragedy is, into some implementation of leftist policies And in this case, it's, the sacrificial lamb, I suppose, is homeschooling. And this is the other thing that's bothersome for me. This is all duplicative. By the way, the suggestions by this committee, because across the country, every single state has a vast network of social services. And if you homeschool your kids, or if you know somebody who homeschools your kids, you know that. They grant bureaucrats power over homeschool families that don't exist in normal families. Every single homeschooling family can tell you, especially those rearing their children in some blue state, that they face the terror of regulators and bureaucrats being able to come into your house and essentially measure your kid by some status measuring stick and potentially take your kid. And this type of intrusive scrutiny can follow any kind of fickle, emotive opinion of a neighbor. I had a friend back in Pennsylvania told me some neighbor that didn't like him called social services, someone who doesn't like homeschooling perhaps. A simple phone call away can sick the bureaucratic bloodhounds of the state on you. And the point of this being that we already have this vast safety net, if you will, trying to make sure that the standards are kept, trying to make sure that parents are keeping up with the norms. And the irony, of course, is that the results of homeschooling academically, it's through the roof when you compare it to public school. So it's a jagged pill to have to choke down lectures on this type of thing. What we basically had was sort of a backdoor attempt to go after homeschooling. And I did some research on this. This might be interesting to you. This is the Census Bureau stats. In the 80s, less than 200,000 kids were being homeschooled. Today, 2.5 million kids, moving on 3 million kids in the United States are being homeschooled. As a result, I would argue, of what the parents perceive as a failure to address educational needs in their children. And this, of course, in the face of trillions of dollars of funding for public schools. I'm going to get back to this. There's so much to be dealing with here. If you want to give me a call, 419-529-1400. Gary's cracking the whip, so we got to take a break. BrockLawleyMusic.com, Brock Lawley Show on iHeartRadio if you want to check this out throughout the week. We'll be back. We'll tackle this. We'll put bookends on this, and we'll deep dive the news a little bit. My name is Brock Lawley. We'll be right back. We're back. My name is Brock Lawley. So essentially, I'm making the case for school choice, freedom, choice. You hear these words a lot in politics. In fact, you hear these words a lot from the Democrats in politics. It's interesting, though, in the implementation of that, often the rubber doesn't meet the road. So here's what I think is going on. Here, there is a huge movement, a lot of money. There's a lot of money laundering when it comes to education and politics, and that's inside baseball. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit. But I'm going to explain to you why I think homeschooling is the focal point here, even though, you have to jump through all kinds of hoops to come up with the rationale to blame homeschooling in the Adam Lanza case. But progressives hate homeschooling with a rabid-like hatred I have experienced. And I've had these conversations for years. My wife, educated school teacher. And it's because their worldview basically depends on indoctrination and propaganda. I discovered this in college. When things are fleshed out, when you have conversations, when you let it breathe, when you have open dialogue with people, this is very, very, very bad, I think, for leftist ideas. That's why they've gobbled up the public education real estate. They've turned almost K through 12 and beyond into a propaganda belt. I've experienced that personally. Classic education has been abandoned for a curriculum of radical social engineering, leftist causes, all kinds of anti-this and anti-that. And when you go to your average school and you a lot of these textbooks that, I've been told you're not allowed to bring home these packets. You're not allowed to see a lot of the stuff people are teaching. There's a good reason for that. Curriculum control is a lot to do with this. Homeschooling parents have curriculum control, and that's very, very troubling to a lot of bureaucrats involved in the education racket. So basically, the more kids that are able to escape this sort of incubator of the mind melt, the less power the left has over the body politic. It's no mistake from the 60s to the 70s on, they have shifted the social temperature of the country, and they've done so via education. And by the way, in my opinion, this is brown shirt tactics, controlling what people do. But the proposed crackdowns on homeschooling as a result of Adam Lanza's rampage, they just completely ignore, and this is repetitive, but they completely ignore the fact the lion's share of his education was in public schools. Even though Adam Lanza was educated in public schools, these public schools have no standing record of his mental instability. So in other words, they didn't catch any of this stuff. So I would argue this is projection. This is passing the buck to sort of make homeschooling a scapegoat. Kind of cathedrals of leftist worship, the public schools. If you look into teachers' unions, if you look at how much money goes to the Democratic Party from teachers' unions, and by the way, I have experienced a lot of the the troubling complaints by school teachers are very, very real. There's a lack of funding on the ground. The tip of the spear doesn't see a lot of the money. You have these administrators paid millions and millions of dollars. Even the classroom is looking for pencils and paper. This is a total breakdown of funding. It's a racket. If you really want to educate yourself on it, go check out some documentaries like The Cartel or Waiting for Superman. It really exposes a lot of this stuff. The teachers' unions basically own the Democratic Party, and they basically take forced taxpayer money. You have to pay your taxes. That goes to a lot of the property taxes is how they fund that. That goes into the teacher union's coffers. The teachers basically send that to the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party spends that nicely cleaned, laundered money on elections. That's actually how it works. And who falls through the cracks? Kids. And predominantly minority kids, by the way. That's what's really, really frustrating about school choice. And to not allow these kids an option to escape that is not right. That is, you should not be bound by your geography. Your educational future should not be linked to that. Now, I did a lot of research on the attacks on homeschooling. The California appellate judges ruled that it was unconstitutional for you to homeschool your kids. That's being fought like crazy out in California. Their parents have had to jump through all kinds of hoops, and they continue to do so because they want to continue to educate their kids. You have to get specialized in each subject, so they sort of join together, and then they got accused of having a school. So then, they keep on dealing with these hurdles that the state throws in front of them. But the point is they don't want them homeschooling. So eventually there's going to be legislation in California in that regard. And many of you might remember I think the Romeke was the name. That was a German couple that escaped Germany because they wouldn't allow them to homeschool. And then the Obama administration was threatening to throw them out. That was, of course, seeking a precedent legally to criminalize homeschooling. And even though that battle was ultimately won, all kinds of legal groundwork was laid there. And here's what really, really bothers me. I'm involved in politics. I've been dealing with politics for a number of years. The Democrats are always talking about choice. You're always hearing the word choice all the time. That's what they'll say. But essentially that means choice to murder an unborn child in the womb. And it pretty much stops there because beyond that, they don't want choice. They don't like choice in your education, as I've established. They don't like choice in how you heat your home. They don't like choice in how you eat. What you eat, how much your soda is going to be, your health care. They don't allow choice in what you think. They don't allow choice in what kind of light bulbs you use. All of these things they war against choice. So saying the word choice a lot is very, very different than actually advocating for a constituency to actually be able to implement choice in their own lives, how they govern their lives, how they rear their children. I am a lover of freedom. I am a lover of liberty. That's why I'm a conservative. And this stuff very much frustrates me because it's doused in hypocrisy. Choice is okay with the Democrats and the quote-unquote progressives as long as you're making the right status choices. That's pretty much what it boils down to. And lastly, if you think about the world that we live in, the democratization of information exploding with the internet, a mouse click away gives you infinite cutting-edge knowledge. You can literally listen to cutting-edge Ivy League lectures online for free from Harvard, the brightest minds of your time. Within this information landscape, we're going to take seriously attempts to restrict the freedom of how you educate your mind. This is preposterous, imprisoning children in this cage of politically correct and politically motivated educational stifling. It's offensive to me. It should be offensive to you. And with that being said, Common Core, you know that the battle, locking horns, I know Ohio, there's all kinds of movements at foot to push back on Common Core. I'm a fan of Kasich, but he needs to get his act together in this regard. He is not right on this issue. A huge overreach in education, and not just that, but the whole system doesn't work. Anyway, locally, here we go. Wednesday night at Ontario Middle School, right around 7 o'clock. Let your voice be heard on Common Core. If you don't like that, and let me assure you, go online, look at some of this curriculum, and ask yourself if you could even do this, let alone a 5 or 6 year old kid. Some of this stuff is so absurd, you're not going to believe your eyes. Anyway, at Wednesday night, Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock, right around there, Ontario Middle School, a bunch of your fellow local citizens are getting together to make their voice heard on the matter. And make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, think about this. If your child has ADD, if he or she has ADHD, if they have any mental hurdle at all, they can and they will use this as huge latitude, to breathtaking latitude, to give the state influence over your children, possibly even taking your children. You're not meeting these needs. You're not meeting these fabricated scenarios that the state. And by the way, has anybody asked themselves what credibility does the state have to determine this over a parent anyway? You show me this track record to where the state has all this shining examples of success in this regard. It's preposterous. You know who understands and wakes up every day stressing about the love and the concern of a kid? Parents. That's who does. Community.